session. So, like I said, this is the session on campaign reports ramping up to deliver, and here to talk we have Kushal Dasgupta. Sorry if I mispronounced that. And Kushal is the Senior Director for Advancement Information Services at NC State University, where his team manages advancement systems, applications, and reporting. NC State celebrated its 125th anniversary in 2012, and the leadership at NC State is currently laying the groundwork for a fundraising campaign that will silently launch on July 1st of 2013. So I will go ahead and hand it over to Kushal now, let him do his own little introduction and get going on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. Welcome. And I also wanted to mention that I'm part of the group that puts this conference together. So if you'd like to tell us how we did this year, let us know. Thanks for coming, and we really appreciate the support you guys have given us by coming to Drive. Some more of the folks filter in. Like Kyle mentioned, I'm the Senior Director of Information Services, and just to lay the ground for this presentation, this is really, if you have done campaign reports for your institution, this is not the session for you. I'm going to really go over the basics. This is more 101 campaign reporting. There's nothing new or that I'm going to share today, really. So you wouldn't hurt my feelings if you were to go to any of the other sessions, because I know there are really some interesting ones, and it's been difficult for me to choose between the sessions that have been offered. So feel free to walk up and go to another session if you'd like. All right. So really, for those that are going to be doing campaign reports for the very first time, really a purpose of a campaign report is to present a strategic outline of your fundraising activity around that campaign period. That's essentially what it is. And so you're trying to inform, educate, motivate, and measure progress. You're trying to measure against a baseline of what you've done so far. You're trying to educate audiences that you're fundraising with, sometimes even internal audiences. And you're trying to motivate the group that is putting the campaign together to make sure you reach your goals. So that essentially is a quick overview of why campaign reports are essential. And really, what I'm going to talk about today is the campaign reports NC State is getting ready to deliver for both internal and external audiences. So a little bit about the NC State campaign. We are going to launch the silent phase of the campaign July 1st, 2013, which is the fiscal year 14. It is going to be a $1.5 billion campaign over an 8-year period. And the silent phase will probably run through fiscal year 17. That is, again, being planned. And as you know, with the campaigns, these things may move around a little bit depending on how fundraising is going for the institution and how the economic climate really is. But that's the overall plan that NC State has, and that's what we are looking to do for this upcoming capital campaign. So what I'm going to do today is give you a few basics and then go over some of the reports that are in development at this time for NC State. So really some basics for campaign reporting that for those folks that are, and I see some very familiar faces that have done this for many, many years. But some basics for those folks that are new to campaign reporting. For the most part, we will have campaign totals in accrual method, so we would count gifts and pledges and not the pledge payments. Even though some versions of campaign reports will have both the cash method as well. But for the most part, the goal of the campaign is going to be measured against the accrual method for campaign totals. The leadership at NC State is at this time finalizing the campaign counting guidelines. The reason I'm mentioning the campaign counting guidelines is in my previous experience, the guidelines are going to be very essential for you to have with you as you're getting ready to create these campaign reports, as well as distribute it to the audiences that are going to consume this report. Because a lot of those numbers are based on counting guidelines that are very specific to the institutions. So to give you an example, one of the things North Carolina State is doing, which I'm sure there are some other institutions that do this as well, we grandfather certain gifts that have come in before the launch of the campaign. Because we are already in conversations with donors about the capital campaign, and some of their commitments for stewardship reasons need to be counted in the campaign, especially if they are transformational gifts that transform the institution. You want them to make the gifts as soon as they're ready, and don't want them to push that back. And so essentially, there are certain gifts that are going to be grandfathered in, and this is about the only policy that we have already in place. The other counting guidelines are still being developed. So the grandfathered policy at NC State is any gifts that exceed $10 million will count towards the capital campaign. And the year before the launch of the silent phase, any gifts that are $25,000 or more and payable over no more than 5 years are also grandfathered in, as long as those gifts are made to endowment or facility projects that are deemed to be the priorities in the campaign. So essentially, this is the kind of documentation you're looking for to back up the numbers that you're trying to distribute with the campaign reports. So I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the documentation that we're getting ready to publish even before we publish the first campaign report. So similarly, we will have campaign counting guidelines that will indicate what campaign gifts will really count towards the campaign totals. Some more basics, the reporting tables that we are building actually today and testing against are being built nightly. And they really by default include every single transaction that comes in the campaign period. For example, right now, any of these grandfathered gifts are already getting into a campaign table as we are testing it. So in terms of reporting, we are trying to capture information nightly, almost every day. But I want to caution you, in terms of publishing the reports, especially to external audiences, you probably do not want to do that nightly. Because there are things that we do with our gift transactions. I mean, there are occasions when you back gifts out for some reason, and the number fluctuates a bit. My recommendation to my leadership at NC State is, especially for external audiences, to publish the campaign total at least a quarter behind. And part of the reason is you don't want to suggest that you just hit the $750 million mark only to realize there was a $1 million bequest that needs to come out, and then now you're sharp, and then next week you reach that goal again. So even though we are going to calculate these numbers nightly, those will probably be only shared with fewer folks and internal audiences. And that's where your campaign counting guidelines might also include who you're going to share the numbers with. If you have different flavors of the report that are for consumption of internal audiences that are closely tracking gifts, you might want to mention that as part of your plan for distributing this information. Some of the design of the reporting tables that we are going through, there are a couple of things we are trying to make sure happens with these campaign reports. One, we want to make sure that there is the ability to count certain gifts that don't qualify. And I just gave you an example, the grandfathered gifts. There may be others like that don't necessarily fit the campaign criteria but should be counted. And there are some occasions when everything about that gift tells you that it should count towards the campaign, but there is something about it that disqualifies it. So we're working on ways where the application will allow us to flag these transactions, so for them to either get counted or not counted, in the campaign totals. Then there may be occasions where you only would capture a partial gift amount. There may be a collaboration with another school, and you don't count the entire gift. You might only count a partial amount. So those are some exceptions that we are tracking in our reporting tables nightly to be able to report that in campaign totals. We also recognize that as the academic side of the house is trying to figure out what the campaign priorities are, that there will definitely be some overlap. So for example, research and student support, or research and faculty support, there may be some overlapping priorities. And through our reporting tables, we want to be able to capture that information so that there is one gift that counts towards more than one campaign priority. So that's the kind of setup in our reporting tables we're trying to make sure happens. And just a funny story, we came up with this $1.5 billion number, although the academic enterprise thinks we need to raise $4.3 billion for meeting all of the priorities that the institution has. So, there is that, and the fact that we are only raising $1.5 billion. So I'm sure we're going to find ways to count that $1.5 billion in many different ways to add up to that $4.3 billion that our academic enterprise thinks we really need to be raising money for. So those are some of the campaign basics, and again, feel free to interrupt me as we are speaking about this. This is more of a collaborative effort. If you've had experiences at your institutions that that I've not thought about here or mentioned here, please let me know. So right now I'm going to move on and talk about 6 campaign reports that we are trying to spec out at this time. So some of what I'm going to show you are mock-ups, and some of those are examples of another institution. Emory, I've a couple of reports from Emory that I really liked, and they've given me permission to share some of that information, so I have that. And I've always only worked for an higher educational institution, but some of these reports are applicable to campaigns in other shops as well, advancement shops as well. So the first report that we are working on is a timeline report, and essentially we want to be able to suggest what each of our campaign years and what we are doing in terms of fundraising. So it would typically track the campaign totals every year that you're fundraising. Here's an example from Emory, and there are a couple of things they have done with theirs, and this is a bit old, but I really like this. In the silent phase of the campaign, they were trying to track what they were doing against 2 goals, 1.5 billion and 2 billion. As you can see, their fundraising kind of indicated they were right in the middle. So you might want to consider doing some of this if you don't want to announce the $1.5 billion campaign in a public phase. this gives the leadership an opportunity to figure out exactly what number they want to announce at the public face. Really, what we are thinking at NC State is that we would track it against 10% up or down and see how NC State is tracking against a number like that, 10% down and 10% up, and see how month by month we are tracking with the campaign. The second thing you want to probably consider is gift and donor pyramids. Again, this is standard fundraising reports for each of the levels, how much you want to raise. I've done a quick mock-up for what would be the numbers for $1.5 billion over an 8-year period. And again, here, this is very configurable and dependent on what your leadership wants to do. I mean, do they really think they have 10 prospects at a $100 million capacity? This may change. And this is really a mock-up that is a starting point for us to discuss this with our advancement leadership, is at what levels do you think we will have our major gifts? And part of this is also the programs that our advancement units are developing. For example, at NC State, we are working on creating a group that is principal gifts only, and principal gifts are defined as 10 million and up. So you get a different metric for the group that is doing principal gifts, and you might want to separate that out some more. So, this is, again, why you're doing this is trying to measure the productivity of the fundraising effort in the campaign period. I give you another example from Emory. This is what they did, and as you can see, this is their actuals on what they had done in that reporting period. And this, as they were trying to figure out what their goal was, they were trying to figure out how many donors they would have at each of those levels. So a gift pyramid report is something that you might want to consider for campaign reports. The next one that we are going to do at NC State is going to try to report by gift types. So how much cash, gift in kind, planned giving life income, realized bequest, and bequest expectancies. The realized bequest and bequest expectancies, that's where also your campaign counting guidelines are going to be very essential, because they would define what you can and can't count in a campaign. Again, at NC State, we're going to follow the case guidelines. And in a bit, I will go over the case survey. But these are the gift types that we are planning to track for the campaign period. And I'm going to back up a little bit. The left navigation really is each of the individual colleges with the running total for the campaign at the very end. So essentially, that's the details by gift type, and these are the gift types we are planning to track. And by gift source, again, this is important, and this is very standard. This is what we do for BSc surveys as well. We're going to track these gift sources, who is giving in that campaign. And again, if you have an alumni that is also a parent that also works for NC State, that's the priority order in which they are going to get counted. Alumni first, then parents, then faculty and staff. So that is essentially the breakdown of gift source, where the gifts are coming from. The fourth report that we're going to do is by gift use, and again, this is very standard, current operations versus endowment versus facilities. And we will have unrestricted and restricted breakdowns for each of these gifts. So essentially, these detailed reports will be summaries of these reporting tables that we have set up that are being generated nightly. So for every gift transaction, you will essentially have information so you can track it in one of these reports. That essentially is the plan. So these are some of the detailed reports. And let me just describe the CASE survey. CASE has a survey out there for higher educational institutions that are in a campaign mode. If you respond to the survey, they collect all that information and share back with you what the industry is doing. So there's a link out there on the CASE website where you have the CASE survey, and I'm going to go over some of the specific information that is going to come out of reporting. So there are 6 sections on that CASE survey. I'm going to focus on C and D because that really is where some of the reporting needs are. A, B, E, and F, really you would only do that once because it is about your institution, about your campaign, it is what duration you're going to have, what size. Those are things that don't necessarily will change year over year. C and D are things that change year over year. So this is something that you would do yearly and get that information back from CASE. E and F, again, institutional profile and campaign operations and staffing, those are really numbers that don't necessarily come from advancement database. They come from other areas of our enterprise, so I'm not going to focus on those. So let's look at section C and look at what that is. It is campaign funds raised climate. And the first question really is, and you saw one of my detailed reports, they are the breakdown of current outright gifts and deferred gifts for each of these constituencies. So essentially, one of our reports will be able to satisfy this need. That's the first question we're going to try to answer. The second one is about the total dollars received from 1%, the top 1% and the top 10% of the donors. And again, this is a representation of the pyramid in some ways, and this is again a number that should directly come out of our reporting tables. The 10 largest gifts and pledges. Again, if you keep track of gifts nightly and put information in your database, you should be able to track that for very easily for this survey. Does your campaign accept real estate gifts, and what is the total dollar value of the real estate gifts? That's the next question, and this is really, really interesting, and I'm not sure how we're going to make up this number. Maybe Kevin can help us with some of this. So I'll let you read the statement. Given that you have a publicly stated campaign goal, how much do you think you will raise in the course of a campaign in the same period if you had not been in a campaign? So this is really one of those where I'm sure we're going to make up some numbers here because I really don't know how you would answer this question. I'm sure you would want to make this positive in some way, but that's the question they're asking. So that's section C. Section D is more about how what the purpose of the campaign is and where you're allocating these funds. Again, you saw this in one of the detailed reports that I put out there, the distribution of the campaign totals between current operations, capital projects, and endowment. And again, for external audiences, you would probably want to do a nice graph of this because that really is the goal of a campaign, is raising, fundraising for each of these areas that are distinctly different in terms of how you use the dollars. there's more detail on specific purposes, and again, some of this is not how we would like to track at our institution. Our institution will probably have specific campaign priorities that we will track against, but CASE looks at faculty support, student support, educational programs, tuition subsidy, all of these other criteria. So setting this up initially will save us a lot of heartburn when we're trying to do this CASE survey. So one of the things we are doing is making sure that we are able to report on these classifications that CASE is using for their survey. So essentially, these are the two sections that really I thought were relevant to our conversation this afternoon. And again, like I said, the CASE survey is annual. Even though you might be in an 8-year campaign period, you would do this one for every of those 8 years. And then again, they collect that information and send you back what our industry is doing. All right, so resources that you may want to use for campaign reporting, CASE. I think I mentioned CASE several times. CASE is a good place to look for. Supportingadvancement.com has a few guidelines out there for campaign reporting. And our handout this morning or this afternoon was a list of institutions that are that have been in 1 billion plus campaigns ever in higher education. I know this is higher education, but you can see it is 2.5 pages long. There are a lot of institutions that have been in that have been fundraising $1 billion plus, including NC State. Our last campaign, the goal was $1 billion, and we raised 1.3. But this time around, the goal is 1.5, and that's what we're getting ready to do. So if you didn't get a handout, let me know and I'll email you this handout. This is off the Grenza Buckler website. They have this list out there. And really the source of this information is the Chronicle of Higher Education. What I've realized is even though we will have all of these numbers and these details, essentially a lot of our leadership is going to ask for this information in a pretty format. So I'm going to take a look at a lot of these campaign websites to see what other folks are doing. And we've had a couple of sessions here at Drive about infographics. I'm sure we will get asked to pretty up those numbers so they make more sense. And that's essentially what we are going to use this list for, is to see what others are doing for campaign reports. All right, I really breezed through my presentation. Do you have any questions for me? Yes, Brian?
I saw one report where it looked like it was a cumulative total. You were comparing against two goals. In the terms of those gifts that get grandfathered in, where would you put those? Would they just be at the very beginning, or?
Yeah, they would just be at the very beginning. So you wouldn't start from zero. You would just start from a number.
Okay,
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a good question. Yes.
What would you suggest for counting gifts that have multiple parts that go to different allocations, like by allocation, so that we're not double counting gifts?
Okay, the question was, what do you do about gifts that go to multiple allocations? Essentially, by design, our reporting table today will have those in 2 rows. Unless there is one gift that counts towards 2 priorities, then it would be 1 row and looking at the campaign priorities and having a check mark against more than 1 priority. Does that make sense? So essentially, you would split it so you don't double count the gift total amount. But in terms of measuring against the campaign.
You can't roll those up into a total campaign gifts, because 2 rows is 2 different allocations, but some people might think of that as 1 gift, right?
Right, so you have to, that is where, your design is going to be important. Depending on what you're trying to get, for example, that will create a problem for your top 1% or your top 10%. So what we're doing is, in some ways, if there are gifts split that way, we have a flag where they will allow us to roll it up for that top 1% number or the top 10% number. So some of that is still being tested, but that's what essentially we're going down the path of doing. Which is if for some reason they need to be split into 2 rows. I'll give you a great example. We had a large gift, a $40 million gift, that in the system is not all $40 million. It's because of the different gift types, it is 27, 7, and then 6. But what we've done is for those 3 rows, we have a way that it would count against the top 10% and the top 1% as one row. So it is just a different view of that table. We are still we are still using one table for that campaign report at this time. But some of this will depend on where our campaign counting guidelines say we should count some of these gifts. So, all right. Any other questions?
How did you arrive at 1.5 billion?
NC State did a feasibility study, and I think there is a formula out there that my boss John Taylor suggests, and I think it is 1.5 times the average total that you raised in the last 3 years, and you add 20% to it. And that's right around that $1.5 billion number. He mentions it as an industry standard, and I guess he's the industry, so that's the standard for you. But really, that's the rule of thumb that was suggested. But we did a feasibility study where our campaign consultant went out there and interviewed the top 100 prospects and figured out their propensity to give in a capital campaign, and those numbers came out of that exercise. Yeah, they looked at prospect pipelines also, seeing how many prospects we had and what proposals were out there, and at a higher level. So that's how we came up with that number. Yep. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.